There is this really comforting illusion that we all just kind of carry around with us every single day.
Oh, absolutely. We have to, right?
Yeah, we do. It's this idea that human behavior, no matter how chaotic it might seem on the surface, ultimately follows like a set of unbreakable rules.
Right.
We learn this from childhood, really. If you do your homework, you get a good grade.
Cause and effect.
Exactly. Cause and effect. If you offer someone a better salary, they'll take the job.
Yeah.
Or, if someone holds up a bank, they want money. Or, I don't know, getaway helicopter.
Right. We like to think that if you just understand the baseline mechanics of a situation, you can accurately predict what the person sitting right across from you is going to do.
Yeah. It's like the physics of human interaction.
Yeah.
And we just blindly trust that gravity always pulls down.
It is an incredibly pervasive worldview, and honestly, for good reason.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, we build our entire societal structures on it. Our corporate strategies, our personal relationships, they're all built on the foundation of those predictable patterns.
Right, because without them, everything is just chaos.
Exactly. Economic models rely heavily on this concept. The idea that rational actors will, act rationally to maximize their gains according to established rules. We find safety in those templates.
We really do. But then, and this is what we're getting into today, you encounter a moment that completely shatters that illusion.
The anomalies?
Yeah, the anomalies. A moment where those unbreakable rules of behavior are just dismantled right in front of your eyes.
The unthinkable happens.
Right. Suddenly you realize you weren't looking at the whole picture at all. Gravity just isn't pulling down anymore.
Yeah, it's a terrifying realization.
It is. Welcome to the Deep Dive, everyone. Today we are taking you into a really intense exploration of high-stakes communication, human psychology, and conflict.
And we're drawing on some truly gripping notes and case studies on advanced negotiation for this one.
Yeah, the source material is incredible. And our mission today, the whole point of this deep dive, is to transform how you view conflict. We want to take it from something that feels like, a terrifying, stressful ordeal and reframe it completely.
We want to reframe it as a collaborative search.
Yes, a search for something called Black Swans. These hidden, seemingly impossible pieces of information that, once you uncover them, completely alter the dynamic of literally any interaction you will ever have.
And what is particularly compelling about the material we are analyzing today is the actual context it comes from.
Right, it's not from a corporate boardroom.
Yeah, not at all. Much of the underlying psychology here was forged in extreme life-or-death crisis scenarios, standoffs, hostage situations.
That is heavy.
Very heavy. And thankfully, these are environments most of us listening will never, ever experience.
Let's hope not.
Right. However, and this is the key takeaway, the exact same invisible emotional forces that govern a standoff with a barricaded suspect are governing your daily life.
It's the same human operating system.
Exactly. They are at play when you are haggling over the price of a car or, when you are trying to secure a budget increase at work.
Or even just navigating a really tense disagreement with your spouse in the kitchen.
Right. The stakes change, obviously. They go from life and death to professional or emotional survival, but the core mechanics remain exactly the same.
So to really grasp this concept of a black swan, we kind of have to start by looking at the tragedy of missing one.
The danger of the known knowns.
Yeah. We need to examine what happens when we rely way too heavily on our assumptions. And there's this deeply unsettling narrative from the case studies that perfectly illustrates this.
The William Griffin case.
Yes, the story of William Griffin. This takes place on June 17th, 1981, in Rochester, New York. And the records describe it, which I found so striking. They describe it as this beautiful 70-degree spring day with an insistent westerly breeze.
And setting that serene stage is actually vital.
Why is that?
Because the violence that interrupts it is so jarringly outside the bounds of normalcy. It really highlights how quickly an established paradigm can just completely fracture.
Right. So you have this guy, William Griffin. He's 37 years old. And he just walks down the shoe-buffed stairs of his parents' meticulous living room.
And without a single word of warning?
Nothing. No argument. He just fires 3 shotgun blasts.
It's rough.
He kills his mother. He kills a handyman who was literally just there hanging wallpaper.
Wow.
Yeah. He critically wounds his stepfather. Then he just leaves the house and starts jogging down the street toward the Security Trust Company, which is a neighborhood bank just 2 blocks away.
And the violence doesn't stop there.
No. Along the way, he shoots a workman and 2 completely random bystanders.
Just absolute chaos.
Total chaos. He enters the bank, takes 9 bank employees hostage, and orders all the customers to leave.
Which instantly initiates this massive, incredibly violent standoff with the police.
Right.
The historical footprint of this event is wild. It notes that Griffin shot and wounded the first 2 police officers who responded to the bank's silent alarm.
And then it just escalates.
Heavily. Over the next 3.5 hours, he shot 6 people walking near the bank. He fired over 100 rounds from that bank.
100 rounds. That is a war zone.
It was. The gunfire was so intense that the police literally had to commandeer a municipal garbage truck.
Wait, a garbage truck?
Yes. They used it as a rolling shield just to rescue one of their pinned-down officers.
That is insane. It turned a quiet neighborhood into an absolute nightmare.
Yeah.
And then right at 2:30 p.m., Griffin finally makes his first communication.
Okay, so this is where the negotiation dynamic theoretically begins.
Theoretically, right. So he waves the 9 terrified hostages into a small office, and he orders the bank manager to call the police.
Who is outside at this point?
Outside, you have FBI agent Clint Van Zandt and Rochester police officer Jim O'Brien. They are running the command post.
Got it.
So the bank manager is on the phone. She is weeping, obviously, and she blurts out Griffin's message.
What did he want?
She says, either you come to the front entrance doors of the bank at 3 o'clock and have a shootout with him in the parking lot, or he's going to start killing hostages and throwing out bodies.
Wow.
And then, click, the line just goes dead.
Okay, so to understand the law enforcement response here, we really have to look at the immovable truths they were relying on back in 1981.
Their standard playbook.
Exactly. The FBI had a very rigid, statistically backed template for how hostage situations functioned.
Because they've done thousands of them successfully, right?
Yes. And the absolute bedrock of that psychological profile was that hostage takers always want something tangible to improve their situation.
Right. Like we said earlier, they want $1 million.
Or they want media attention to broadcast a grievance. Or they want a getaway vehicle to a non-extradition country.
They want to live, basically.
Yes, and the deadline, that 3 p.m. threat he made, that was viewed purely as a mechanical tool.
Like a negotiation tactic.
Exactly. The authorities believed that a deadline was just a high-pressure tactic designed to focus the mind of the police, force them to make concessions.
But they didn't think he would actually follow through.
No. Because the accepted wisdom of the era was that you never actually kill a hostage on a deadline.
Why?
Because the hostage is your only leverage. Once you kill them, you lose your bargaining chips. The police have no reason to negotiate anymore. They just breach the building.
That makes total logical sense.
It does. It was considered a permanent, inalterable truth of human behavior in a crisis.
So law enforcement believed they were just in a waiting game.
Right. They were waiting for that 3 p.m. deadline to safely pass so the real negotiation could finally begin.
They were interpreting all of Griffin's extreme violence entirely through the lens of their past, successful experiences with standard bank robbers.
Which was a fatal mistake.
Yeah, because then 3 p.m. arrives.
And the unthinkable moment happens.
It really does. Griffin gestures to a 29-year-old teller named Margaret Moore. She's petrified. She actually begs for her life, telling him she's a single parent with a young son.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
It has no effect on him whatsoever. He forces her to walk to the glass vestibule doors at the front of the bank.
Where everyone outside can see.
Exactly. And then he just shoots her. 2 heavy blasts from a 12-gauge shotgun. She is blown right through the glass door. Killed instantly.
It is a profoundly tragic event. And from an analytical standpoint, psychologically, it completely paralyzed the command post outside.
I can't even imagine.
It shattered their entire reality in a split second because it became instantaneously obvious that the established playbook was completely useless.
He didn't want money.
No, he didn't want an escape route.
And his very next action proves that, beyond a shadow of a doubt,
What does he do?
Griffin walks right over to a full-length bank window. He presses his body right up against the glass, in full, deliberate view of a police sniper stationed in a church across the street.
And he knew the sniper was there.
He absolutely knew. He had actually fired at that specific position earlier in the afternoon. So he knew exactly what he was doing.
Wow.
And less than a second after Griffin steps into the crosshairs, the sniper pulls the trigger. Griffin is killed.
Which brings us to the really critical analysis of the blind spot here.
Right. Because the tragedy isn't just that human behavior is unpredictable.
No, the deeper tragedy, and what the source material really hammers home, is that the clues to Griffin's true intent were actually present throughout the entire afternoon.
The police just missed them.
Law enforcement missed them entirely because their paradigm completely blinded them to anything that didn't fit the expected narrative.
Now, I have to push back here a little bit, though,
Sure.
because hindsight is always 20/20, right?
Mm-hmm.
The FBI had conducted thousands of successful negotiations using their standard template.
They had.
So isn't it a bit unfair to blame them for missing clues to a suicide by cop scenario if that concept literally didn't even exist in their behavioral playbook yet?
Yeah.
Like, how can you actively look for something you don't even know exists?
It's a completely fair point, and honestly, it strikes at the very heart of why this material is so challenging to apply. It is incredibly difficult to see something you have no concept of.
Right, it's like trying to see a color that hasn't been invented.
Exactly. But the analytical failure wasn't in lacking the precise clinical psychological definition of suicide by cop.
Okay, then what was the failure?
The failure was in actively ignoring the anomalies because they didn't fit the expected narrative. The command post was taking incoming contradictory data and trying to force it into a neat pre-existing box.
Okay, let's look at those anomalies then. What were the actual clues that were bouncing off their rigid template?
Well, there were several major red flags. First, throughout the standoff, Officer O'Brien kept calling the bank's phone.
Trying to establish contact,
Right, but every single time someone answered, they immediately hung up.
which is weird.
It's a massive anomaly. Standard hostage takers generally want to talk because they need an avenue to express their demands. Silence is huge.
Okay, so that's clue one.
Second, the police had actually received a report of a double homicide a few blocks away at Griffin's parents' house.
Where he shot his mom.
Yes. But in all the chaos, they didn't connect it to the bank standoff. They didn't realize they were dealing with an individual who had already crossed the psychological threshold of murder before the standoff even officially began.
That changes the math completely. If you know he's already a killer today, you don't assume he won't kill again.
Exactly. And then there was the note.
Oh, right. The note he forced a hostage to read over the phone earlier in the day.
What was in it?
Well, see, it wasn't a bulleted list of demands for a helicopter or cash. It wasn't standard. It was this rambling, incoherent diatribe about his life and his personal grievances.
Just venting.
Yeah, but it was so unfocused that the command post didn't even register one specific, absolutely game-changing line buried right in the middle of it.
Which was?
The note explicitly said, quote, "After the police take my life."
After the police take my life, he broadcast his end goal directly to them.
He told them exactly what the plan was.
But because the FBI was playing a very structured game of chess, they were looking for standard knight and rook moves, they simply couldn't process that Griffin was playing an entirely different game.
He had just flipped the board over entirely.
Yes. The conclusion those clues pointed toward simply didn't exist in their universe of possibilities.
So think about how this applies to you listening to this right now. You aren't dealing with violent bank standoffs, obviously. But how often do you enter a performance review or a client pitch or even an argument in your kitchen so completely sure of what the other side wants that you become entirely blind to what they're actually signaling to you?
It happens constantly.
It really does. You assume your boss only cares about the bottom line. You assume your partner is just irritated about the dirty dishes. You walk in with your known knowns, and you completely tune out the subtle or rambling or anomalous clues pointing to a totally different reality.
You fail to hear what is actually being said because you are only listening for what you expect to hear.
Exactly. And that over-reliance on existing templates is precisely what keeps us from discovering the hidden dynamics in any interaction.
Right. So moving from the fatal consequences of missing those clues, we need to examine the actual theoretical framework behind these hidden realities.
Like, what exactly are we looking for when we decide to abandon our assumptions?
This is where we define the Black Swan.
Yes. And the term itself is a fascinating historical context. Up until the 17th century, if you lived in London, the phrase Black Swan was actually a common idiom.
It was used to describe an impossible thing, right?
Exactly. It was a statement of absolute, irrefutable certainty. They believed all swans are white, therefore a black swan cannot physically exist. It was the ultimate symbol of the unthinkable.
But that absolute certainty only held until 1697.
What happened then?
A Dutch explorer named Willem de Vlaming was sailing off the coast of Western Australia, and he documented seeing actual, physical black swans swimming in the water.
Just hanging out.
Right. In a single moment of simple observation, the impossible became real. The prevailing worldview wasn't shattered by, like, a complex academic theory.
No, it was destroyed by the discovery of a single piece of new information that sat entirely outside the known framework.
Which is such a perfect metaphor. And modern risk analyst Nassim Nicholas Taleb actually took this historical quirk and applied it to catastrophic and game-changing historical events.
Yeah, he popularized the term for our era. He used the Black Swan to describe occurrences that were completely unpredictable based on previous human experience, but they carried massive, massive consequences once they occurred.
We are talking about events like the attack on Pearl Harbor, or the sudden rapid rise of the internet, or the financial collapse of 2008.
Right. And the interesting thing is the markers, the clues, they were often visible in
They're
hindsight,
always visible in hindsight.
but they sat completely outside our regular expectations at the actual time, so we just ignored them, like the FBI with the note.
Exactly. Now, applying this to human interaction requires breaking down the information matrix of any negotiation, or even just a deep conversation, into three distinct categories.
Okay, let's break those down.
The first category is your known knowns. These are the concrete facts. You know your counterpart's name, you know their initial asking price, you know the current market interest rate.
It's the stuff written down on the paper in front of you.
Yes. Basic, verifiable facts.
Then you have the second category, the known unknowns. The analytical material we have refers to these as poker wildcards.
Right, I like that term.
Mhm.
These are pieces of information that you are fully aware exist, but you simply don't possess them yet.
Like what?
So if you are buying a house, you know the seller has an absolute rock-bottom price they will accept in their head.
But you don't know what that exact number is.
Exactly. Or say you're in B2B sales. You know there is a possibility that the primary decision maker might be traveling next week and could delegate the contract signing to someone else.
You can logically anticipate these gaps in your knowledge and actively try to fill them with targeted questions.
Right. But the holy grail of high-stakes communication lies in the third category.
The unknown unknowns.
Yes, these are the Black Swans. These are pieces of information that you have never even imagined.
You don't even know that you don't know those.
Precisely. But if you were to somehow uncover them, they would instantly and fundamentally alter the entire dynamic of the interaction.
Let's give a corporate scenario for this.
Yeah.
Let's say you are trying to close a massive software contract.
Okay.
You are pulling out all the stops,
Yeah.
right? You're offering discounts, you're promising extended support, but the executive sitting across the table just keeps stalled.
Standard negotiation friction.
Right. And you might logically assume it's a budgetary issue or maybe a timing problem. Those are your known unknowns.
You ask, is it the price? Is it the implementation timeline?
Exactly. But the Black Swan might be that the executive is secretly planning to resign in 2 weeks to launch a competing startup. Yeah. And they actively want your deal to fail so their new company can swoop in later and steal the account.
That changes everything.
Completely.
Yeah.
And you would never naturally think to ask, excuse me, are you sabotaging this deal because you are secretly quitting to become my competitor?
No, because it is entirely outside your frame of reference.
So dealing with this requires a massive paradigm shift in how we communicate. It highlights exactly why traditional questioning, like the way we are taught to interrogate a problem in a boardroom or a classroom, fails so spectacularly.
Because traditional questioning is designed solely to confirm our known knowns.
And maybe fill in a few known unknowns.
Right. We ask targeted, closed questions to verify what we already suspect is true.
But if your questioning technique is only designed to verify your expectations,
Then your expectations are all you will ever find. You will completely miss the teller hanging up the phone. Conventional research is just about reducing uncertainty within an already existing framework. It is not designed to excavate the unthinkable.
I love the analogy the source material uses here regarding Steve Jobs and the iPad because it just crystallizes this concept beautifully.
It's a great example.
Before the iPad launched, if Apple had conducted, 1 million consumer surveys using traditional questioning techniques, literally nobody would have written down, I want a flat, keyboardless glass screen that sits somewhere functionally between my smartphone and my heavy laptop.
Because we didn't know we wanted it.
Exactly. We couldn't articulate the desire because the entire concept of a tablet was an unknown to the general consumer at that time.
And Jobs famously eschewed traditional market research for exactly this reason. He understood that consumers only know what they already know.
So what did he do instead?
Instead of asking them what they wanted, he interrogated the world. He just observed. He watched human behavior, noticed their frustration, and saw how they interacted with existing technology.
He looked for the anomalies.
Right. And he used that observation to uncover a hidden need, a black swan, without the consumers themselves even realizing the desire was there.
He didn't ask for opinions. He observed the unarticulated reality. And the hypothesis we are working with today is that these black swans exist in every single interaction you have.
The analysts actually suggest that in any given negotiation, each side is hiding at least 3 game-changing pieces of information.
3.
At least 3. But to unearth them, you have to understand the invisible physics at play between 2 people. You have to understand the underlying force that makes these hidden truths so valuable.
And that force is leverage.
Yes. Leverage. Now, leverage is a notoriously misused term.
Oh, yeah. In corporate environments, self-help seminars, people toss it around as a synonym for power, dominance, or just having the upper hand in a debate.
I have the leverage.
Right. However, the psychological definition we are using today, based on the notes, is much, much more precise. Leverage is simply defined as the ability to inflict loss and withhold gain.
The ability to inflict loss and withhold gain, that sounds incredibly clinical, almost, I don't know, detached.
On paper, it is, but in interpersonal practice, it is entirely emotional. The crucial distinction that must be internalized here is that leverage is not power.
They aren't the same thing.
Not at all. Leverage is an emotional, highly fluid concept based entirely on perception. The physical reality of the situation matters far less than what the person across the table thinks you are capable of doing.
To illustrate the difference between power and leverage, let's use a very grounded, sort of extreme analogy from the notes.
Okay.
Think of a billionaire real estate mogul, Donald Trump, or really any billionaire.
Sure.
They possess immense societal power. They have vast wealth, teams of aggressive lawyers, political influence, endless resources.
Right, high power.
But imagine that billionaire is wandering lost in the Sahara Desert, and they are actively dying of dehydration.
Okay, setting the scene.
They stumble across a lone vendor sitting in the sand, selling the only bottle of water within 100 miles. Who has the leverage in that specific negotiation?
Well, the vendor with the water, obviously.
Exactly. The billionaire retains all their societal power. Their bank accounts still exist. But in that specific environment, the vendor has the absolute ability to withhold gain. And that gain is the water required to sustain life.
The overarching power dynamic is rendered completely irrelevant in the face of acute situational leverage.
It's totally fluid. It sloshes back and forth between parties depending on the immediate needs of the moment.
So to harness this, we need to categorize leverage into 3 distinct types, because understanding which bucket you are operating from dictates your entire strategy.
Let's start with the first bucket, positive leverage.
Positive leverage is the most straightforward to identify. It is simply your ability to provide something the other side desires.
The moment an individual expresses a want or a need to you, you instantly acquire positive leverage. You control access to their desire.
Let's apply this to a real business scenario. Say you decide to sell your mid-sized logistics company.
Okay.
You put it on market and you wait. And you wait for months with no bites at all. The anxiety is really building.
You start sweating.
Yeah. Finally, a prospective buyer approaches and says they want to purchase the company. You are initially thrilled. Right.
Of course.
But then they slide a term sheet across the table with an offer that is laughably low. It's frankly insulting. The natural human reaction here is defeat. You feel totally cornered, thinking, I have absolutely no leverage. This is the only offer I've received in 6 months. I just have to take it.
But the necessary mindset shift here is recognizing that the very act of the buyer making an offer, even a predatory lowball one, grants you positive leverage.
Because they want it.
They have revealed a desire. They have invested time and legal resources into drafting an offer because they actively want your asset.
So instead of feeling trapped by the low number, you pivot. You use that positive leverage.
How?
If you have casually spoken to other interested parties in the past, you can leverage this new lowball offer to create artificial competition. You go to those casual contacts and say, hey, I have a firm offer on the table if you want in. The window is closing right now.
And suddenly you have a bidding war.
Exactly. Or if this genuinely is your only buyer, you use their desire to dictate non-monetary terms. You reply to the lowball offer and say, you know what, I will accept that valuation, but only for a 75% stake in the company, allowing me to retain a board seat and operational control.
You are utilizing their revealed desire to extract secondary value.
Right, which naturally leads us to the darker side of these dynamics, The second type, negative leverage.
If positive leverage is the ability to withhold gain, negative leverage is the ability to inflict suffering.
It is entirely rooted in threats. If you don't lower the price, I will launch a smear campaign against your brand. Or, if you don't work the weekend, I'll terminate your employment.
Psychologically, this grabs attention immediately. It taps into a well-documented cognitive bias called loss aversion.
Right, the behavioral economists.
Yes, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. They proved that humans are generally far more motivated to avoid a loss like losing their job, their social status, or even just $100 than they are to achieve a gain of the exact same value.
The pain of losing is psychologically much sharper than the joy of winning.
However, a massive warning must be attached to using negative leverage.
Yeah, the text is very clear on this.
It is highly effective in the short term, but the analytical material compares it to detonating a nuclear bomb. Yes, it will obliterate the immediate obstacle in front of you, but it leaves behind a toxic radioactive residue that destroys the long-term relationship.
When you shove a threat down someone's throat, you are stripping them of their autonomy. And human beings fundamentally despise losing their autonomy.
They will fight back.
Hard. If you push too hard, they will act entirely irrationally. They will intentionally blow up a lucrative deal or quit a high-paying job just to spite you and reclaim their sense of control.
Therefore, the tactical application of negative leverage requires extreme subtlety.
You never make a direct threat.
Never. Instead of detonating the bomb, you use subtle linguistic framing to trigger their loss aversion without directly attacking their autonomy.
Like instead of yelling, if you deliver the shipment late again, I'm voiding the contract.
Right. You reframe it as a collaborative observation. You say, it seems like you place a high value on the fact that your company has always maintained a pristine reliability record in this industry.
Ooh, that's good. You are gently pointing out the cliff edge without physically pushing them toward it.
Exactly. Or you say, it seems like you aren't concerned about the position this delay puts our partnership in. You are highlighting the potential loss of the relationship or their reputation, but framing it as a neutral observation.
That is a masterclass in finesse. Now, the third type of leverage, however, is where the psychology gets incredibly deep. Normative leverage.
Normative leverage relies on utilizing the other party's own moral framework, their stated rules, or their personal standards against them.
Because psychologically, humans abhor hypocrisy.
Cognitive dissonance is deeply physically uncomfortable for us.
So if you can uncover the core rules by which someone governs their life or their business and politely demonstrate how their current negotiating position actually violates their own rules.
You generate immense leverage.
Let's say you are negotiating with a vendor who prides themselves on their marketing materials, constantly advertising that they always offer fair market value.
Okay.
And you can empirically prove that your counteroffer is the exact median market value they advocate for. They are trapped by their own marketing.
They cannot refuse your offer without admitting their core slogan is a lie.
Right. Which brings me to a question for you listening to this. Think about a recent conflict where you felt entirely powerless. A dispute with a contractor, a fight with a sibling, a stalled project at work. Which of these three buckets of leverage were you ignoring?
It's a great question to ask yourself.
Did you forget that they actually needed something from you? Did you fail to subtly highlight what they stood to lose? Or had you completely failed to understand the moral framework they were operating within?
And that transition into understanding their moral framework brings us directly to a pivotal concept in the notes. Employing normative leverage successfully relies entirely on discovering what the analytical framework calls your counterpart's religion.
Their religion. And to explore how to find someone's religion, we're going to dive into another incredibly intense narrative from the case files.
This one is wild.
It is. This is the standoff involving Dwight Watson in March 2003, right in Washington, D.C.
Now, before we unpack the events here, it is really essential to establish an objective baseline.
Yes, definitely.
Watson's actions were heavily political and deeply intertwined with his religious ideology. Our purpose here today is strictly to analyze the communication tactics, the active listening, and the psychological interplay used by the negotiators to resolve the crisis.
We are examining the mechanics of persuasion. We are absolutely not evaluating or endorsing the political grievances or the methods he utilized.
Exactly. So here is the scenario. Dwight Watson is an incredibly frustrated tobacco farmer from North Carolina.
A combination of changing government agricultural policies and severe droughts have just decimated his livelihood. He's on the verge of losing the farm that has been in his family for 5 generations.
So he's desperate.
Beyond desperate. In an act of extreme protest, he hitches his Jeep to a massive John Deere tractor, covers the vehicle in protest banners and an upside-down American flag, and drives it straight into the heart of Washington, D.C.
He navigates the tractor directly into a shallow pond situated on the National Mall, right between the Washington Monument and the Vietnam Veterans Memorial.
The physical location is highly symbolic, but the immediate threat is terrifying. He calls the police and claims he has organophosphate bombs packed inside the tractor.
Now, for anyone unfamiliar, we are not talking about standard gunpowder explosives here.
No, organophosphates are the chemical basis for highly lethal nerve agents, like sarin gas.
If he actually detonated a dispersal device in the center of the Capitol,
The potential for mass casualties was catastrophic. Furthermore, the timing amplifies the terror. This is March 2003.
right, the context is vital.
The Beltway sniper attacks had terrorized the region just months prior. The buildup to the Iraq War is reaching its peak, and the entire city is on a knife's edge.
The tactical response is immediate and massive. The surrounding area goes into immediate lockdown. Tactical sniper teams are deployed all around the mall.
Meanwhile, Watson is on his cell phone speaking to the Washington Post, declaring that he is on a do-or-die mission. He states that God explicitly instructed him to undertake this protest, and he is fully prepared to be blown out of the water and ascend to heaven.
So the primary negotiator involved in the case study was deployed to a converted RV, acting as the command post right there on the National Mall.
And the central thesis of the negotiation team's approach was completely counterintuitive to how most of us normally argue.
Right, they didn't try to debate him.
No. They believed that in a high-stakes crisis, success is not determined by the eloquence of your argument, but by the depth of your listening.
They were actively hunting for the Black Swans hidden beneath his angry rhetoric. They needed to discover his religion.
And as the term suggests, in Watson's case, it involved actual theology, but more broadly, religion refers to a person's underlying worldview, their reason for being.
The rigid rules that dictate their perception of reality.
The negotiation team focused entirely on unearthing who Watson was, rather than trying to logically debate the merits of agricultural subsidies.
Or the futility of fighting a SWAT team, because logic is entirely useless when an individual has already accepted death for a cause.
Exactly. So, through hours of intense listening, they began piecing together his profile. First, they validated that his primary desire was to draw national attention to the plight of struggling tobacco farmers.
Acknowledging and validating that desire gave the negotiators a degree of positive leverage that could offer him an audience.
But the massive structural breakthrough occurred when Watson revealed a seemingly random detail about his past. He was a military veteran.
Specifically, he had served as a military police officer in the 82nd Airborne Division in the 1970s.
And this detail is the ultimate piece of normative leverage. Veterans operate on deeply ingrained codes. They have rules of engagement.
Right. And Watson casually admitted to the negotiators that according to his specific military training, if a soldier is trapped behind enemy lines, they are permitted to withdraw with honor.
But, and this is a huge but, only if reinforcements fail to arrive within 3 days. A soldier cannot honorably surrender before the dawn of the third day.
Suddenly, the negotiators have a rule they can hold him to. They realize he isn't necessarily suicidal. He is willing to live, but his religion, his military code of honor, strictly forbids him from doing so immediately.
They began utilizing a blend of negative leverage, the subtle threat that if he forces a tactical resolution today, he will die before his message can truly resonate, alongside the positive leverage of promising him an audience if he surrenders.
But they hit a massive logistical wall here.
They did. The situation on the ground was deteriorating rapidly. Watson was experiencing erratic, angry outbursts inside the tractor.
And the tactical commanders outside were losing patience. The snipers have been given the green light to neutralize him if he made a threatening move.
The negotiators knew that if they pushed too aggressively with negative leverage like directly threatening him with the snipers, they would trigger the paradox of power.
Which is what?
The harder you push someone, the more intense the resistance becomes. They simply couldn't wait 3 literal days for his military code to be satisfied. They had to accelerate his internal timeline without violating his code.
And this is the moment where active, empathetic listening literally saves lives.
Enter FBI agent Winnie Miller.
Right. She had been on the negotiation team monitoring the calls, listening intently to the subtle, almost throwaway theological references Watson had been weaving into his rants.
And she recognized a distinct pattern. She turned to the lead negotiator and stated, "He is a devout Christian."
And she didn't just stop at identifying the trait, she provided the brilliant tactical application.
She did. She suggested, tell him tomorrow is the dawn of the third day. That is the day Christians believe Jesus Christ left his tomb and ascended to heaven. If Christ came out on the dawn of the third day, why not Watson?
It is a stunning piece of synthesis.
Truly. By intertwining his military three-day rule with his Christian theology, the negotiation team didn't just offer him a clever linguistic escape hatch.
No, they provided irrefutable proof that they truly heard him. They understood the architecture of his soul.
They positioned their core demand, surrender the tractor, and step out unarmed, entirely within the framework he used to make his most profound decisions. They deferred to his ultimate authority.
And in the very next conversation, when the lead negotiator casually mentioned that tomorrow was the dawn of the third day,
The transcript notes a long, heavy silence on the line, and then Watson coughed and quietly said, I'll come out.
and the standoff ended peacefully the next morning.
No explosives were found in the tractor.
It is a dramatic example, obviously, but the underlying psychology is profoundly applicable to daily life.
How so?
The behavioral mechanism at play here is known as the similarity principle. Biologically, humans are hardwired to trust individuals who belong to their in-group.
Right. We instinctively trust people who are familiar to us, who look like us, or who sound like us.
Belonging is a primal evolutionary instinct. When you consciously display attitudes, beliefs, or even specific vocabulary that perfectly matches your counterpart's worldview, you trigger a deep sense of mutual belongingness.
You effectively bypass their defensive cognitive filters.
There is a brilliant corporate anecdote in the material detailing an Ohio CEO that perfectly encapsulates this everyday application.
Tell me about it.
So, a consultant was attempting to close a lucrative advisory deal. The CEO was pacing his office, agonizing over whether to authorize the massive expenditure and bring the advisors on board.
He's stressed out.
Highly stressed, repeatedly venting, nobody understands my vision, nobody understands what I'm trying to build here.
But the consultant had been listening.
Closely. He had been listening to the CEO's previous tangents and recognized a specific cadence. The CEO consistently made subtle references that aligned closely with born-again Christian literature.
So the consultant knew he needed a word that would resonate specifically on that exact frequency.
Right. He looked at the CEO and said, "This decision is really about stewardship for you, isn't it?"
Oh, wow. Stewardship.
Yes. The theological duty to administer resources with honesty, care, and absolute accountability to a higher power.
What was the reaction?
Instantaneous. The CEO's posture completely changed. His voice strengthened, and he said, "Yes, you're the only one who truly understands."
And he signed it.
Signed the contract right then and there. The breakthrough had absolutely nothing to do with the price of the consulting fee or the scope of the deliverables.
It was entirely about the negotiator tuning his language into the exact vocabulary of the CEO's deeply held religion.
Exactly. And to understand why a single word like stewardship or a phrase like dawn of the third day is so potent, we have to look at the mechanics of persuasion.
The material references a landmark study here, right?
Yeah.
Conducted by Harvard psychologist Ellen Langer in the late 1970s.
Yes, the copy machine study.
I actually want to bring this study up because it perfectly illustrates the almost automated way our brains process requests.
It's fascinating.
So, Langer set up an experiment where researchers would approach a line of people waiting to use a library copy machine. In the first scenario, the researcher would simply ask, "Excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine?"
Just a straight request.
Right. And when they asked, without providing any justification, about 60% of the people in line allowed them to cut ahead.
Which is a surprisingly high baseline of generosity, to be honest.
It is. But the psychological trigger occurs in the next phase of the experiment.
What did they change?
In the next variation, the researcher added the word because, followed by a completely idiotic, redundant reason.
Like what?
They would ask, "Excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine because I have to make copies?"
Because I have to make copies. That provides zero new information. Everyone in line has to make copies.
Exactly. But simply by inserting the word because, compliance skyrocketed to over 90%.
That is wild. The mechanism here is cognitive automation. Humans are socially conditioned from infancy to respond favorably to a framework that includes a justification.
Right. The brain hears the word because, assumes a valid reason is following, and automatically lowers its defensive barriers to the request. It literally doesn't even process the rest of the sentence.
So the tactical advice here is to combine this psychological hack with your counterpart's religion.
Let's return to the Ohio CEO. If that CEO had initially offered a low-ball price for the consulting services, the negotiator shouldn't just forcefully reply, "No, I need a higher fee."
Because that creates friction.
Instead, he should leverage the worldview. He should say, "I would love to accept that offer, but I too have a strict duty to be a responsible steward of my firm's resources because my team relies on me."
You attach the automated trigger of because directly to the anchor of their worldview. It constructs an almost inescapable logical loop for them.
They cannot vehemently argue against your position without arguing against their own internal religion.
Think of it like tuning an old-school radio dial. If your boss, your client, or your partner is broadcasting in AM and you are trying to argue your brilliant, perfectly logical point in FM,
It literally does not matter how loud you shout. It doesn't matter how robust your PowerPoint presentation is. They do not possess the hardware to receive your signal. You have to locate their frequency.
which naturally leads us to a dangerous and very, very common pitfall.
Yeah.
If locating their frequency is the absolute key to resolution, what happens when we try and we fail? What is the default human reaction when an individual acts in a way that we simply cannot comprehend?
We dismiss them entirely. We throw our hands up and declare they're crazy.
It is the ultimate intellectual cop-out.
It truly is. It's the most pervasive label applied in any difficult negotiation, spanning everything from trying to reason with a toddler having a tantrum to navigating high-stakes international diplomacy.
When we are confronted by the unknown, when a counterpart's actions defy the logic of our own framework, we label it crazy.
Why do we do that?
Because labeling someone irrational grants us psychological permission to stop trying to understand them. It lets us off the hook.
The material includes a quote from Peter Bergen, CNN's national security analyst, regarding the traditional U.S. policy of refusing to negotiate with terrorist groups. And again, maintaining strict impartiality here. We are not evaluating foreign policy decisions or the morality of these organizations. We're examining the communication rationale behind the policy.
Right.
Bergen summarized the prevailing thought. Negotiations with religious fanatics who have delusions of grandeur generally do not go well.
And the authors of our source material fundamentally critique this stance from a purely tactical perspective.
Because shrugging your shoulders and ladling the other side crazy is a massive strategic error.
It is. Understanding their fanaticism, understanding the specific architecture of their delusions, is the most effective and often the only way to discover their vulnerabilities and gain influence.
You cannot develop leverage if you refuse to understand the internal logic driving the behavior, regardless of how abhorrent that behavior is.
Using their crazy is just an excuse for analytical laziness. Drawing on the work of Harvard Business School professors Deepak Malhotra and Max Bazerman in their book Negotiation Genius, the analysts argue a really provocative point.
Nobody is actually crazy.
Right. When someone acts completely irrationally, it does not mean their brain is broken. It simply means you are missing a black swan.
They identify 3 specific reasons why people exhibit this seemingly crazy behavior.
Let's unpack the first reason. They are ill-informed.
This is the classic computer science problem of GI go, garbage in, garbage out.
Exactly. If an individual is operating on fundamentally flawed data, their subsequent decisions will logically appear insane to anyone who actually holds the correct data.
There's a fantastic corporate example of this in the text. An executive was facing a hostile lawsuit from a recently terminated employee.
The commission dispute.
Yes. The ex-employee was aggressively demanding $130,000 in unpaid commissions. The executive, wanting to settle the matter quickly, went to his accounting department and realized the company's books were an absolute disaster during the period the employee was fired.
So they did a deep dive.
The executive ordered a deep forensic audit, and the audit revealed a stunning fact. Not only did the company not owe the employee $130,000,
Wait for it.
but due to overdrawn draws, the employee actually owed the company $25,000.
Okay, so armed with this correct data, the executive makes a highly logical move. He calls the ex-employee and says, look, we audited the books. The math shows you actually owe us $25,000. However, to avoid the time and expense of a drawn-out lawsuit, if you drop your claim today, we will forgive the $25,000 debt. You walk away clean.
It is an incredibly generous offer based on the newly discovered facts.
But the employee aggressively rejects it. He refuses to drop the suit and demands to go to trial.
To the executive, this is pure insanity. He is offering the guy a free pass on a $25K debt, and the guy is demanding an expensive trial he is mathematically guaranteed to lose. The executive hangs up the phone and thinks this guy is completely crazy.
But the professors correctly diagnosed the underlying issue here. The ex-employee wasn't crazy, he just lacked information, and more importantly, he lacked trust.
He didn't believe the executive's numbers over the phone. He assumed it was just a corporate trick to scare him.
He was continuing to operate on his own garbage data.
So how did they resolve it?
The executive hired an outside, independent accounting firm to audit the numbers again, and had that firm send the official certified results directly to the ex-employee's lawyer.
And the moment the employee received the verified, clean information from a trusted third party.
He immediately dropped the lawsuit. The craziness evaporated the second the information asymmetry was resolved.
Which brings us to the second reason people appear crazy. They are constrained.
Your counterpart might seem wobbly, indecisive, or irrational because there are hidden forces heavily restricting their actions forces they are deeply hesitant to reveal to you.
These constraints could be strict legal advice they can't disclose, toxic internal company politics, or a sudden loss of authority.
The story involving a Coca-Cola marketing deal illustrates this beautifully.
A boutique marketing firm had been negotiating a massive sponsorship deal with a contact at Coca-Cola for months. The relationship is stellar, the terms are practically finalized.
But suddenly, in late November, the Coca-Cola contact just goes completely dark. He stops answering calls, ignores emails.
The marketing executive is panicked, because if this deal doesn't close before the end of the year, he loses his entire budget cycle. He starts complaining to his team that his contact at Coke has lost his mind or turned into a massive jerk.
The negotiator brought in to assist advises the marketing executive to send a very specific, calibrated email designed to trigger a response. But even that fails. The contact remains completely unresponsive.
Superficially, ghosting a multi-million-dollar partner at the finish line is highly irrational professional behavior.
But they refused to accept the crazy label. They dug deeper. They started making discreet calls to other vendors and contacts who knew the guy at Coke.
And they found the Black Swan.
The contact's specific division at Coca-Cola was in the middle of total structural chaos. There was massive corporate infighting, restructuring, and this specific contact had completely lost all of his internal political influence. He no longer had the executive power to sign off on the deal.
Crucially, understanding the human element is key here. He was too embarrassed to admit his loss of status.
That was his hidden constraint. His silence wasn't craziness, it was the self-preservation of his ego. He couldn't say yes to the deal because he lacked the authority, and he was too deeply ashamed to tell a vendor, I don't have the power around here anymore.
The third reason for crazy behavior is that they have other interests. We actually already saw the most extreme version of this with William Griffin at the bank.
Right. The police thought he was crazy to execute a hostage on a deadline because his presumed interest was negotiating for money or escape. But his hidden interest was suicide by a cop.
The material provides a much more relatable, everyday corporate example of this, though. Imagine a high-performing employee who suddenly quits a career-making project right in the middle of implementation, just weeks before the annual bonus season.
To the manager, this is financial insanity. Why walk away from a massive guaranteed payout?
The manager thinks it's crazy because the manager's known is that employees are primarily motivated by money.
But the hidden interest, the Black Swan, might be that the employee just accidentally discovered that a significantly less qualified coworker was recently hired at a higher base salary.
Suddenly, the internal interest of fairness and personal respect supersedes the interest of the monetary bonus. The employee isn't acting irrationally. They are strictly obeying a set of internal rules that the manager hasn't uncovered yet.
I think it's important to address a very natural pushback here.
Let's hear it.
A listener might hear all this and think, wait, isn't it completely exhausting to always play Sherlock Holmes? Do I really have to assume the other person is always a rational actor hiding a secret constraint? Sometimes people just act purely on raw emotion. Sometimes they just get mad and yell.
It's a highly valid question. I struggle with that myself. Do we really have to dissect every single argument looking for a hidden motive when the person is just clearly throwing a tantrum?
The psychological reality is that even raw, unbridled emotions follow a logic of hidden interests. Anger is almost never a primary emotion.
What do you mean?
Anger is usually a secondary emotion masking fear, a profound feeling of disrespect, or a sudden loss of autonomy. When someone is screaming at you across a conference table, they aren't being crazy. What is happening biologically is that their amygdala has hijacked their nervous system because a core psychological need is being threatened.
So the moment you assume they're just emotional and stop looking for the source of the threat, you entirely forfeit your ability to de-escalate and influence them.
The ironclad rule is never use the word crazy. Treat it as a clue that you are missing something, not a conclusion.
Okay, so if we accept that we need to look for hidden information, hidden constraints, and different moral frameworks, the obvious question is, how do we actually get them to reveal these things? What are the tactical tools for excavation?
Let's look at the actual brass tacks of digging for swans. The absolute first rule of tactical excavation emphasized in the material is the critical, irreplaceable importance of FaceTime.
Like being in the same room.
Yes, in the modern corporate and social environment, there is a massive detrimental over-reliance on email and text messaging. It feels safer. It feels highly efficient. But text-based communication is a terrible medium for uncovering black swans.
Why? Because it strips away the vast majority of human nuance. The material points to the well-known 738-55 rule of communication, established by psychology professor Albert Moravian.
Right. Only 7% of a message is conveyed through the actual words used.
38% is carried by the tone of voice, and a massive 55% is transmitted through body language and facial expressions.
When you try to negotiate a complex issue over email, you are voluntarily blinding yourself to 93% of the available data.
Furthermore, asynchronous communication like email completely removes the element of spontaneous psychological pressure. Even if you craft the absolute perfect, psychologically calibrated question designed to throw them slightly off balance and reveal a truth.
Email gives them hours or even days to recover. It allows them to recenter themselves, consult with colleagues, and draft a highly sanitized defensive response that perfectly conceals their true position.
Let's go back to the Coca-Cola executive who lost his influence and stopped replying to emails. The negotiator didn't tell the marketing guy, draft a harsher, more demanding email.
No. He told his client, you have to physically get this guy out of the Coca-Cola complex. Go to his office, take him to his favorite steakhouse, tell him explicitly that you won't talk business, you just want to catch up and have a few laughs.
The underlying strategy was to force direct human interaction in a completely non-threatening, disarming environment.
And it worked perfectly. Over dinner, without the defensive posture required in a boardroom, the contact finally relaxed, broke down, and admitted he was the wrong guy to talk to and that his division was a mess.
He then facilitated an introduction to the person who actually had the authority. The deal took another year to close, but it only happened because they forced FaceTime.
And the material gives a really practical tip about when to pay the closest attention during that FaceTime. You want to constantly monitor for unguarded moments.
Because the most revealing information almost never surfaces when everyone is sitting formally around the mahogany conference table reading bullet points off an agenda. People's professional guards are fully up.
Exactly. You have to hunt for black swans at the fringes of the interaction. Pay intense, focused attention during the first 3 minutes of a meeting before the pleasantries officially end.
And especially during the last few moments as everyone is packing up their laptops and walking toward the elevator.
It's the classic Columbo technique from the old detective show. Just one more thing, right at the door.
Seasoned investigative reporters know this trick intimately. They never turn their audio recorders off when they say thank you. Because the most honest, revealing quote almost always comes when the subject believes the formal interview is over and drops their PR facade.
Also, watch closely how people behave during unexpected interruptions. If someone knocks on the door to deliver a message or the caterer arrives with lunch, watch the room.
Watch who immediately defers to whom. Watch the micro-expressions of annoyance or submission. That is when the organizational cracks show.
To illustrate how these excavation tactics work in real time, there is a fantastic case study in the text involving an MBA student. Let's refer to him as the intern working for a private equity real estate firm in Charleston, South Carolina.
The Charleston real estate intern. This narrative is an absolute masterclass in synthesizing everything we've discussed. So the intern is tasked by his boss to investigate a mixed-use commercial property located right in the heart of downtown Charleston.
The asking price is $4.3 million. The intern and his boss do their preliminary homework and determine the property is realistically worth about $450,000 less than that.
So the intern initiates contact with the selling broker. Now, the intern is young and doesn't have decades of experience in the specific Charleston market, so he uses a psychological label right off the bat to gather intelligence.
He openly admits he doesn't know the deep market fundamentals, and the broker immediately flexes his ego, boasting that he has been dominating the market for 15 years and knows every brick in the city.
The intern feeds that ego. He doesn't challenge it. He starts asking calibrated how and what questions. How has the downtown Charleston area been affected by the recent economic downturn?
And the broker, eager to demonstrate his superiority, provides a massive detailed monologue proving his expertise.
And then the intern deploys another label. Yeah, it sounds like I'm in good hands. This seemingly simple phrase builds massive empathy and significantly lowers the broker's defensive posture. The intern then transitions to asking specific questions about the cap rate.
For those not in commercial real estate, the cap rate is basically the expected annual rate of return on the property based on the income it generates.
Through this conversational back and forth, the intern extracts some highly crucial facts. The building is heavily populated by local university students. The occupancy rate is a pristine 100%.
Furthermore, strict historic preservation rules in downtown Charleston mean no developer can come in and build a competing modern high-rise nearby. The broker is so confident, he literally refers to the building as a cash cow.
But this is where the intern's active listening triggers an alarm. He senses a massive anomaly. He processes the data and thinks, if this building is 100% occupied, structurally protected from future competition, and is a literal cash cow, why on earth is the seller trying to get rid of it?
It defies economic logic. It appears entirely irrational.
So the intern goes hunting for the Black Swan. He constructs a label, but he deliberately mislabels the situation to provoke a specific reaction.
He says to the broker, well, if the seller is getting rid of such an amazing cash cow, it seems like the seller must have serious doubts about the future market fundamentals of this area.
This is a brilliant, highly calculated tactical move. By intentionally mislabeling the seller's intent, he directly challenges the broker's earlier, ego-driven assertion that the Charleston market is bulletproof.
Psychologically, human beings possess an almost irresistible urge to correct others when they are wrong.
It is so incredibly true. If you ever want a quick answer to a complex question on the internet, the worst thing you can do is just ask the question. People will ignore you. The quickest way to get an answer is to confidently post the wrong answer and wait 3 seconds for a dozen experts to aggressively correct you.
Precisely. The urge to correct overrides the instinct to conceal, and the broker falls right into the psychological trap. To defend his expertise and the honor of the Charleston market, the broker blurts out the hidden truth.
He says, no, the market here is completely fine. The seller actually owns some really tough, underperforming properties in Atlanta and Savannah, so he has to sell this cash cow immediately to generate the liquid cash required to pay off the impending mortgages on those failing buildings.
And there it is. The Black Swan is dragged into the light. The intern just uncovered the seller's hidden, desperate constraint. The seller isn't operating from a position of strength. He is selling out of sheer financial terror. He needs liquid cash right now to save his broader portfolio.
If we break down the mechanics of the negotiation from that exact moment, this piece of unknown completely shifts the polarity of the leverage. The intern mutes the phone, briefs his boss on the hidden constraint, and gets authorization to drop an extreme anchor.
He gets back on the line and offers $3.4 million. That is nearly a full $1 million below the asking price.
The broker, desperate to secure the cash for his client, comes back with a counteroffer of $3.7 million. And this is where the intern's rigorous preparation pays off. Yeah. Even though $3.7 million is actually lower than his firm's original internal target, he doesn't immediately accept it.
He pushes further, stating, we simply cannot, in good conscience, pay more than $3.55 million. Ultimately, the broker admits he is only authorized by the frantic seller to go down to $3.6 million, and they lock in the deal.
The intern successfully saved his firm $700,000 off the initial asking price, entirely because he listened for the logical anomaly and utilized a deliberate mislabel to extract the hidden constraint.
It is an objectively amazing outcome. But here's the reality check we have to confront. Listening to these case studies is fun. It sounds like an intellectual spy movie. But actually executing these tactics in the real world,
actually sitting across the table, looking a seasoned professional in the eye, and dropping an extreme anchor almost $1 million below their asking price, for the vast majority of us, that is utterly terrifying.
that fear is not a character flaw. It is a deeply ingrained evolutionary biological response. When you are about to initiate a conflict, when you're about to look someone in the eye and say no or demand a significantly lower price, your palms begin to sweat. Your heart rate elevates.
You experience the classic physiological fight-or-flight response, with an overwhelming psychological emphasis on flight. The material makes a truly fascinating point about the origin of this biology. Why are we so scared of a negotiation? Are we genuinely afraid that the car salesman or our boss during a salary review is going to physically leap across the desk and punch us in the face? Obviously not.
The physiological fear originates in the amygdala. Think of the amygdala not as a rational, modern advisor, but as an ancient, overzealous smoke detector in your brain. For our ancient ancestors, getting along with the tribe was a literal matter of life and death.
If you caused friction, if you were perceived as greedy, difficult, or uncooperative, you risked being ostracized from the group. And a million years ago, being exiled from the tribe meant you would inevitably freeze or starve to death.
So, your ancient smoke detector cannot tell the difference between a slightly burnt piece of toast, like a tough salary negotiation, and the entire house burning down. It equates interpersonal conflict with literal death. That biological alarm bell is screaming at you, just agree, just pay the sticker price, keep the peace so we don't die.
Yielding to that biological fear leads directly to what the analysts call the compromise trap. It leads to wimp-win deals in corporate boardrooms, and it leads to silent, corrosive resentment in domestic kitchens. People routinely avoid making their true interests known out of an irrational fear of appearing selfish or difficult.
They fold early, they split the difference, they compromise across the board, and as a result, they grow deeply bitter. Eventually, the professional partnerships or marriages fail. You often hear about couples who get divorced and their friends say, but we never even saw them fight.
Exactly. Avoiding the conflict doesn't magically solve the underlying problem. It merely internalizes it until it becomes toxic. The premise here is that if you want to be a highly effective negotiator, or respected manager, or a genuinely supportive spouse, you have to actively overcome this biological terror.
You have to embrace regular, thoughtful conflict as the necessary basis of a functional life. The foundational mindset shift required to achieve that is realizing that the individual sitting across the table is not the problem. The situation is the problem. The person across the table is actually your required partner in solving that problem.
I want to highlight a specific story from the material about buying a red Toyota 4Runner because it brilliantly attacks the guilt people feel about negotiating. Pushing hard for a good deal feels like bullying to a lot of empathetic people.
The author of the text goes into a dealership and utilizes all these aggressive-seeming tactics, the extreme anchors, the calibrated questions, the calculated silences, to relentlessly grind down the price of this truck. The natural, empathetic instinct is to think, wow, he really humiliated that salesman. He essentially took food off his family's table just to save a few bucks.
However, when you critically examine the economic reality of that specific transaction, that narrative is entirely false. The negotiator pushed relentlessly for maximum value, yes. But in doing so, he actually helped that specific salesman close a unit and reach his monthly volume quota, which in the automotive industry is often tied to massive, retroactive corporate bonuses.
And furthermore, even at that agonizingly negotiated rock-bottom price, the dealership still paid less to the manufacturer for the vehicle than what the buyer ultimately paid the dealership. Everyone involved still made a mathematical profit.
The rigorous search for value is not bullying. It is not about aggressively strong-arming a weaker opponent. It is an information-obsessed, highly empathetic search for the absolute best possible deal where everyone walks away with their core underlying interests met.
To help circumvent that overpowering amygdala response when you are actually in the thick of a stressful negotiation, the material recommends having a highly structured mathematical fallback system. There is a military anchorage that applies here. When the pressure is on, you do not magically rise to the occasion, you fall to your highest level of preparation.
They call this specific system the Ackerman plan. I'd love to actually break down how this works because understanding the why behind the numbers is crucial. Instead of just winging the haggling and letting your emotions dictate the terms, you utilize a rigid plan.
You start by determining your absolute target price. Let's say you are negotiating the purchase of a piece of B2B software and your target price is $100,000. You start with an extreme anchor of 65% of your target. So $65,000.
The vendor will immediately reject that, obviously. But as a counteroffer, you make mathematically decreasing concessions. Your next offer is 85% of your target, $85,000. Then 95%, $95,000. And finally, if pushed to the absolute limit, 100% of your target goal.
Why do the concessions have to shrink? Why not just go up by $10,000 each time?
The psychology of shrinking concessions is incredibly powerful. If you increase your offer by $10,000 every time, the counterpart assumes you have infinite money and will just keep pitching. But by moving from a $20,000 concession to a $10,000 concession to a final $5,000 concession, you are non-verbally signaling that the well is running completely dry.
You are physically demonstrating that they are successfully squeezing every last available drop of value out of you.
And the final step of the plan is to end on a highly specific, non-round number. So instead of exactly $100,000, your final agonizing offer is, say, $98,453. It gives the psychological illusion of absolute calculated precision.
It makes the vendor feel like they have forced you to empty your pockets and count the change, while in reality you landed practically in the zone you meticulously prepared for. It creates a collaborative solution where they feel victorious and you get your price.
The guy across the table is not the problem. The situation is the problem. If you can truly internalize that concept, the biological fear of conflict begins to melt away.
We have covered an immense amount of psychological ground today. We started by examining the horrific tragedy of the known knowns with the William Griffin standoff, learning how relying on rigid historical templates blinded law enforcement to the reality screaming right in front of them.
We defined what a black swan truly is, that impossible, unimaginable piece of hidden information that instantly changes the entire dynamic of a conversation. We analyzed the invisible physics of leverage, understanding that it is a fluid, entirely emotional force based on perception. Whether you're utilizing positive leverage, navigating the dangers of negative leverage, or employing normative leverage.
We witnessed how discovering a counterpart's religion, much like Dwight Watson's deeply held military code, can unlock peaceful resolutions to impossible situations. We challenged the intellectually lazy instinct to label difficult people as crazy, recognizing instead that they might simply be ill-informed, restricted by hidden constraints, or acting on alternative interests we haven't discovered yet.
We learned the tactical mechanics of digging for those swans by prioritizing face time, utilizing the Columbo technique during unguarded moments, and using labels and deliberate mislabels, just like the Charleston real estate intern. And finally, we confronted the deep biological fear of conflict, reframing it away from a life-or-death tribal struggle and into a necessary, highly empathetic search for mutual value.
It demands a complete paradigm shift in how we approach every facet of human interaction.
It fundamentally changes how you view the world. And before we go, we want to leave you with one final, provocative thought to mull over. We've spent this entire deep dive looking outward. We've discussed the tactics to find the black swans hidden by the people sitting across the table from you.
But consider this. The underlying theory states that every negotiation, every deep conflict, possesses unknown unknowns on both sides. So what are the 3 black swans that you are carrying into your conversations today that you haven't even admitted to yourself?
What are your own hidden, embarrassing constraints? What are your unarticulated religions and rigid rules? Because until you honestly identify your own blind spots, you are just as unpredictable and constrained as the person sitting across the table.
It is an unsettling but absolutely essential question for ongoing self-reflection.
So the next time you walk into a room feeling completely sure that you know exactly how the physics of human behavior are going to play out, remember that gravity doesn't always pull down. Look for the anomalies. Look for the black swans. Thanks for joining us in this deep dive. We'll see you next time.